I've skipped ahead a little bit, so we're reading the Silmarillion. Chapter 11 of the Sun and the Moon and the Hiding of Valinor, or like, really this should be called Of the Sun and the Moon. That bit was cool. And of the hiding of the Valinor behind the cowardice of the Valar. I have feelings about this chapter because it's just, like, it's kind of complicated thinking about how annoyed you are at the Valar, but then, like, you can't really be annoyed at them because their intentions are pure, and it's just like, oh, I don't know, it's just, there's got to be an in-between. So I've skipped through chapter 10, which was of the Cinder, because this sort of, I'll come back to it. Maybe I'll come back to it at the end of this video, but I also have questions as to if this book was written by the elves, how did they know that Melkor, then Morgoth, handed or hid the jewels from Ungoliant? Like, how do they know about that interaction? There's just a few interactions that I'm just like, okay, how do we know that that is the case? Did they talk to orcs? Did they find out about it later down the track from like Sauron or like another elf who knew about it? I don't know. So there are two parts of this chapter. Really, the part is about like what the Valar are doing post the Noldor leaving, and also the sun and the moon. The big thing that they do to prove that they aren't actually idle and just twiddling their thumbs is that they make the sun and the moon. And this is a really beautiful passage. I really love that there is a story of how they get like the remnants of the trees and make them into the sun and the moon. I love the fact that they have Tilion guiding the moon and Arien guiding the sun, and Tilion is actually just like also really loves the sun and tries to chase the sun around, hence why the moon has an irregular pattern in the sky, because obviously the sun is like clockwork back and forth, but the moon does sometimes appear during the day, sometimes at night, sometimes it's full, sometimes it's like just a little sliver of a crescent, and sometimes it even blocks out the sun. And they actually sort of, and it's actually mentioned here, Tilion went with uncertain pace as yet he goes, and was still drawn towards Arien, as he shall ever be, so that often both may be seen above the earth together, which is cute, or at times it will chance that he comes so nigh that his shadow cuts off her brightness and there is darkness amid the day. So that's explaining eclipses as well. I thought that was really neat. I think Arien and Tilion are two Maya. I also kind of like that we're told that even though the sun and the moon came from the dying breath of Temporion and, what's the name of the other tree? Oh, it's not Temporion, it's Telporion. And Laurelin. But their dying breaths, they create the sun and the moon. But it is made very clear that, and this is interesting, that the light of the trees, that they don't recall the light of old, and that the light of old that was originally in the trees now lives only in the Silmarils alone. It's interesting. I actually predicted, and I was wrong about this, I thought the sun and moon were going to be two of the Silmarils that got lifted into the sky somehow. Like somehow they were taken from Morgoth and put into the sky, which means that there's one remaining Silmaril, which I think from earlier in the book, it is noted that one of the Silmarils has been lost forever, never to be found. So that kind of made sense to me. I was like, so there's two in the sky, one is forever lost. And no, I'm wrong about that. I don't actually know what happens to the two Silmarils. They get destroyed somehow. Anyway, such a beautiful sequence, and I must say, I am obsessed. There's a picture here, which is so far my favorite picture in the book, which just looks like a normal sunrise or dusk upon a mountain, but knowing that it is the first dawn of the first sun that ever rises makes it so beautiful. And I was just staring at it being like, can you imagine the first time you're a 2,000-year-old elf, you've only ever lived in Middle Earth, among darkness, among the stars, and you see for the first time light hitting the mountain, casting its shadows. like long, you know, the long shadows of dawn. Can you just imagine waking up to that and looking around and seeing colors like you've never seen before? Suddenly, because, you know, in darkness you don't have the same color vision. I mean, elves could be different, but the different colors that you get, the oranges and yellows that then fade and then come back at the end of the day, seeing that for the first time would be incredible. Like, can you imagine being like, I was there the first time the sun ever rose, like I'm that old. On that note, actually, before I get onto anything else, I really loved that there's a word here, ilmen, which actually means the space where the stars are. So above the air, there's space, and that's where the stars are. Because there's a line here that says, when Morgoth was chasing Tilion around, it was around ilmen, which is the space where the stars are, which is basically it's space. I just love that there's a word in this book for where the stars are. Like, it's just so beautiful, like where Vada does her work, even though like it's technically space, like a vacuum in our world. Like, it's just so nice that it actually has a name. I also really loved the description of the moon as wayward or like willful, like it just kind of does what it wants. And it does, it pulls like the tides around. I don't know if the tides are mentioned here very much. And I also love the detail about how the servants of Morgoth actually looked up at the first sunrise and they were amazed because they were just like, what the hell is this? And the elves of the outer lands looked up in delight, and even as the moon rose above the darkness in the west, Fingolfin let blow his silver trumpets and began to march into Middle-earth. And the shadows of his host went long and black before them. That's quite cute. Like, I definitely like the idea that just as Fingolfin is arriving is the first time the moon comes up. That's pretty cool. The heart of fire that awakens and consumes, for the sun was set as a sign for the awakening of men and the waning of the elves, but the moon cherishes their memory. That, like, reading that line, like, stopped me. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so true. Like, the sun here is the greatest metaphor so far in the book, because really the sun representing men and the moon representing elves. If you actually think about that deeply enough, it starts to screw with you, because even though the sun seems so much bigger and greater than the moon, the sun is actually mortal. Like, the sun has finite fuel in it and it will burn itself to death and then become a supernova or explode. So technically the moon is immortal because the moon isn't burning up any fuel. It's just a chunk of rock. It will forever float in space unless it is otherwise destroyed, but left to its own devices, it would remain the way that it always will. Like, I'm pretty sure all of the stones on all of the rock on the moon is inert. Like, it's not really changing if it's left in its own little world. So like, that representation alone is so perfect to have men represented by the sun, which itself technically is going to burn to death eventually, because it's burning so brightly that its fuel is going to get used up so quickly. Just like men, there's so much passion and energy and they burn through their fuel so quickly and then age and perish, just like the sun. And the coolest thing about that whole metaphor is that if you think about our universe, when the sun does die, it's going to explode out and consume Earth and the moon in its process as it explodes and destroy them. And I kind of like that metaphor, that as men come onto the scene, they burn so brightly that in their burning, they are going to completely trample and destroy the kingdoms of the elves. And that is just the coolest metaphor. I do not know if that's what Tolkien meant, but it's just so perfect. So perfect. So that's the cool part. The annoying part of this is the stuff about the Valar. And initially I was really conflicted because the very opening of this chapter, you kind of have Manwë's POV. And he's just like, well, they're all in mourning. They're mourning for the death of the trees, but what really got me was that they're actually mourning more for the marring of Feanor. They mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Feanor, which of the works of Melkor is the one of the most evil. So they think that Melkor's destruction of the trees is terrible, but they're actually more concerned and worried about Melkor's marring of Feanor and influence on Feanor. And that's just such a beautiful thing, really, because here they're accentuating that the trees were just a thing, but Feanor was like one of the children of Iluvatar, is one of the children of Iluvatar. There is an illusion that is about to die in this chapter, because Mandos says it, so it must be true. But they're more worried about the well-being of the children, despite how evil they are, than the death of the trees. And I just found that it's very much angelic. It was told by the Vanya, that Vanya were hanging out with the Valar a lot during these days, that when the message came back from Feanor about Feanor's answer being like, no, we're pushing on, we're not, like, screw you, that Manwë wept and bowed his head. And so he's truly mourning the loss of not just Feanor, but all of the Noldor, I imagine. And that was just really nice, and I truly believe that's what he thinks, which is why it just makes so little sense as to their actions after this. It just seems so frustrating and annoying as to what they do after. Yes, it's a great thing that they put the sun and the moon in the sky. Yes, thank you for that. That's probably helped a lot. But it's almost like they did that. They're like, here you go, have the sun and the moon, that will help you. And then we're gonna, like, go hiding for the next 1,000 years and not help you at all. It's like, you can't complain because we gave you the sun and the moon, and now we're going to piss off and we're going to put up all of these walls so you definitely can't come back. It's like it's just so weird. Why? Though I do like how Manwë realizes that of the badness of what's happening with Feanor, that good will come out of that. And so he at least celebrates that, okay, so all of this bad stuff is happening, but he can see that goodness will come out of it. The words written are as, thus even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been. The wording is confusing to read, but basically it just means that good will come of evil, beauty will come of ugliness, is how I've interpreted that. And Mandos is like, yeah, but there's still always going to be evil remaining. To me, shall Feanor come soon. Oh, like, Mandos knows everything. He must be, like, so screwed up in his head. Oh, he must be so bored. Like, if he truly knows everything, Mandos, like, yeah, it must be kind of dull to watch it play out. I don't know. And I think I did know that Feanor was going to die relatively early on, potentially. Like, I've just read about the first Battle of Beleriand, and he's not mentioned there at all, but I was, in all of the spoilers that I've been looking at, and like, because I was reading some stuff in this book, which is amazing, by the way. Some of the, like, battle maps are just so useful to get your head around. But I was reading, and I do see that Feanor dies quite early on. Which is good, because we actually need to get him off the page so that other elves can come up and, like, have some personality, because there's so many others and Feanor just keeps outshining them and out-talking them. So I'm glad, even though I'm sad. But it's just so funny that they're just like, that Manwë is like, good will come from great evil, and Mandos is like, yeah, but evil is still always going to exist. Just so practical. So practical. I wonder what Mandos thinks of Manwë's, like, uber positivity. A little bit of bile coming up in the back of his throat. So, yes. Then they just basically go on to... They do what they did last time. Like, they do the same thing because they're not learning from their mistakes. I mean, obviously, it might not be a mistake, because maybe if the Valar actually did go to war, worse things would happen, which I'm sure must be the case, but it just seems so frustrating to see them for the second time in a row just hunker down, put up further walls around, like, the western shores, cover them with fog and mist so that no sailors can come in, except for one, apparently, the mightiest mariner of song. I don't know who that is, but someone is going to at least find a way back to Valinor finally, don't know when. but he shut the Blessed Realm against the Noldor and everything else so that now no messengers can come in. So they don't know what's happening in Middle-earth. They can't send help because they don't know what's happening. I'm assuming that they've decided just to, once again, close their eyes to it, la la la, and not want to know anything about it. They're like, we've put the sun in the sky and the moon. Now we don't have to feel guilty about the fact that we're not going to help the elves anymore. And it's just so funny because they're like, we'll leave a little gap open, which is Kalakuria, because we don't want to completely sunder the Teleri wholly from their kin, which is just like, oh, thanks for the thought, because the Teleri are still living on the islands. And yeah, it's actually kind of cute. You actually get, Finarfin ruled the remnant of the Noldor in the deep cleft of the mountains. Okay, so he's made it back already. But for all of those elven race, even the Vanya and Ingwe their lord, okay, so the Ingwe is still leading the Vanya and Finarfin is leading the rest of the Noldor, and then there's the Teleri. So that's who's there at the moment. Just chillin'. Just chillin'. But it's just frustrating. And of course we have to have it like this, because if the Valar came, then we wouldn't have a story of the elves because they'd be outshined by the Valar. So I get that. For story and plot reasons, the Valar have to get out of the picture. So that's kind of a good thing, but it is frustrating. And I wanted to mention another interesting point about Morgoth. So firstly, Morgoth is just like, what the hell is the sun? Can you imagine him just like getting up out of bed and being like, ew, gross. I am not a... He like discovers he's not a morning person and hates everything about the daylight. But then he hates the night because the moon's in the sky is a symbol of the elves, who he hates even more than men. It's just so funny. Morgoth hated the new lights and was for a while confounded by this unlooked for stroke of the Valar. It's like, this is unwarranted, guys. What the hell is with this bright light? It's like when someone comes into your room in the middle of the night and puts the light on and you're just like, it's so shocking and awful and uncalled for. And that's exactly what Morgoth's going through right now. He's just like, what the hell is going on? Which is funny. And he tries to fight Tilion but can't, and then dares not go near the sun, which is hilarious. And the interesting thing, so what I wanted to say is that Morgoth is giving all of his power to like orcs and other evil creatures, which is making him grow weaker and weaker, and he's becoming more and more bound to the earth. His might passed into them and was dispersed, and he himself became ever more bound to the earth, unwilling to issue from his dark strongholds. So that's really interesting. The fact that we now know that one of the Valar, although, hang on, what is he called? A Valar? No, Ainur. He's an Ainur originally, right? So now that we know that Morgoth as an Ainur can distribute some of his power out, that's an interesting thought, because it makes me think, can the others do that as well? Can Manwë do that? Can Vada do that? Can Ulmo do that? Can Aule do that? And if that is the case, this is yet another thing that the Valar could have done. Like, if they knew that Morgoth was weakening himself, which is like his only act of selflessness, Morgoth, even though he's doing it for himself, he's weakening himself for himself. Technically, the Valar could do that. They could disperse all of their remaining power and give it to the elves to fight evil. But they didn't. They didn't. Or they haven't yet. Maybe they will later. So that kind of makes me hate them even more, knowing that they can do that. It could just be that Morgoth is the only one who's figured out how to do that, but it does make me think that if their power is finite, that they can just find a way to distribute it. I guess it's possible that Melkor, being the most creative out of all of them, was the only one that figured out how to distribute his powers. Like, that's possible. Because in many ways he was the one most like Ilúvatar. Like, right now Morgoth is the one who is being like the most sub-creating, because he's creating all these new races and putting evil into them. Sure, he's making disgusting races, but he's the one kind of in an awkward reflection, being most likely Iluvatar at this point. Although I don't think Iluvatar actually gave up his own power to create the Ainur. I think he remained infinite, but this is the point of a sub-creator. It's a finite resources going out into something that is always going to be finite. So that's interesting that Melkor is doing that. And it also makes me think, if he's going to be unable to leave his dark strongholds, he's really going to need to be calling on Sauron. He's going to be like, help, I'm stuck. I have no power left, which makes this really interesting. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting reflection that Morgoth is the only one who's willing to give up his power to become more powerful, and for his own ends, I should say, whereas none of the other Valar are willing to give up their power for their own ends. Everything they've done so far hasn't actually taken away their sort of finite power. So I don't know, just another interesting point to add on to the fact that there were so many things that the Valar could do that they are not doing. And I'm not going to pretend that I understand it, because obviously this is Iluvatar's design. So yeah, two really interesting things about this chapter. We know Feanor's about to die, and we also know that there is a mighty mariner who's going to come back to Valinor eventually, and yeah, that's pretty cool. Like, we are getting like some interesting points. I don't really know what's going to happen at this point. We have, the next chapter is of men, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get lots of elves dying really soon, because we have to skip through all of these battles really quick to get to like the Third Age. So see you later.